It's not to just pick on Ada. There's plenty of altcoins that are putting in new lows as well, where a lot of people are throwing in the towel on the altcoin market because they're now saying it's dead and that it'll never recover. Even if you're an Ada maxi, you could appreciate that thought that Cardano is a higher risk play than Bitcoin. We've talked about this idea of searching for a cycle bottom for quite a long period of time. And as you guys are aware, and I've made very clear, that throughout a bear market year and a pre-halving year and even the early stage of a halving year for Bitcoin, that altcoins can and will likely continue to bleed. That has been something that we've talked about for a long time. And recently, Ada actually went in and put in a new low, in fact. So the prior low, I mean, it wasn't much lower, right? But the prior low was about 0.239, and last week we went down to about 0.220. So as you can see, right, like this is clear evidence that altcoins can put in new lows even if Bitcoin isn't. It's not to just pick on Ada. There's plenty of altcoins that are putting in new lows as well. Polkadot, Chainlink, Avalanche, the list goes on and on and on, right? But it just goes to show you how the altcoin market can get wrecked for much longer than people think it can. The important aspect to look at is the Bitcoin valuation, not the USD valuation. To remind you, we've put out a few videos on Ada Bitcoin, and the whole idea is that it would likely go down to around this 400 Satoshi level, right? This was back when it was closer to 2,000 Satoshis. And I mean, here's another one as well when it was around 2,000 Satoshis as well. And just to provide an update to this, right? I mean, you can see, in fact, that it is more or less following what we would have suggested that it would have, right? Like that it would ebb and flow. It's an oscillator at best, I think. And it sort of ebbs and flows from one end of the spectrum to the other. And when you're up here, no one ever thinks you're going to go down here. And when you're down here, no one ever thinks you're going to go back the other way. And if you go look at Ada Bitcoin today, you know, it has fallen down to around 1,000 Satoshis. And in the most recent wick, it went down to about 851. I had previously said that this summer, I thought we would see Ada go down to around that 800 Satoshi level. And now we have more or less hit that level as we went down to around 851 Satoshis. Where was the Ada Bitcoin valuation exactly 4 years ago? Well, it's the week of June 12th. The week of June 12th. The week of June 12th, back over here, or around there, June 10th, we were right around 1,000 Satoshis, guys. I mean, this is basically just right out of the playbook. We are at the same valuation then. And for reference, last cycle, I learned my lesson because last cycle, I actually bought Ada back over here. I thought I was a genius, you know? And this was in Q3 of 2018. And that's why this time when we got to Q3 of 2022, I said, guys, like, I would have thought that was the low back in the last cycle too, but it wasn't. Even though Bitcoin bottomed in 2018, Ada did not. And it actually went and put in a new low in March of 2020. We saw that Ada rallied from December for about half the year, and then it sort of just faded, rally into a recession, and then plummet, right? I think that you could argue that we've sort of done this first part, right? Rally for the first part of the year. We've come back, we could be going lower as well, but we have come back down some. At some point, we could still see it go even lower as it slowly bleeds back to Bitcoin. You can use the Bitcoin dominance to better understand when altcoins are theoretically worth the risk or theoretically not worth risk, and it's not financial advice, but you can use the Bitcoin dominance to give you some insight into that. And I will say, right, like it should be no coincidence that it was basically once Bitcoin broke the range high right here, where a lot of people are throwing in the towel on the altcoin market because they're now saying it's dead and that it'll never recover. We know, I mean, just from prior experience, when Bitcoin dominance breaks the range high, that is the narrative that will prevail, usually for several months, right? That the altcoin market will likely just continue to bleed against Bitcoin, and I think it probably will. I mean, I suspect that the Ada Bitcoin valuation needs to come back down to around 400 Satoshis eventually. And if you think that's crazy, we also called for 800 Satoshis this summer, and there was a lot of pushback on that idea, and yet now you can see just how quickly we went down to that 800 Satoshi level as the Bitcoin dominance broke the range high. Okay, so then the general expectation is that at some point the ADA Bitcoin valuation could in fact fall all the way down here. That's not to say that it has to happen tomorrow or next week. It could stay like at these levels for quite a while before it falls back down. I don't know. I do know that back over here when it fell pretty quickly, but that's not to say that it has to fall as quickly this time. Last time we were at around 1,000 Satoshis in June, and then by August we were at 400 Satoshis. So if in 2 months ADA is at 400 Satoshis, you know, if the ADA Bitcoin valuation is at 400 Satoshis, and it's basically the same thing that happened last cycle. Think about how this chart, we've had this chart drawn on here forever, right? Q3 2023. We are getting pretty close. Q3 starts next month. So we'll keep an eye on this because it has been playing out more or less how we thought that it would. And it's just a matter of does it find some local support around the 800 Satoshi level for a while and then drop, or does it just go straight down? I don't really know. Arguably, if it did get one more 50% drop on its Bitcoin pair, then it's basically back down to the lows from the last cycle. Okay, so I think it's an important thing to pay attention to. Again, the problem is that people want to front run everything, and they don't want to be patient. They don't want to just kind of sit around and wait. Mostly focus on Bitcoin, since most altcoins bleed to Bitcoin during this phase. And having a good cash position, they just want to YOLO into the altcoin market as quickly as they can. And this was basically me saying back then that, look, guys, it's probably not the bottom, because just because it's Q3 of 2022 doesn't mean anything. I mean, I thought the same thing in 2018, and then we ended up dropping it at the end of the year. This drop, it occurred, right? I mean, like, you can go look at this. We eventually dropped, right? And we continued to drop. I mean, look at this. It's just continued to slowly drop. It bounced back up, and then it's now rolling over once again. And so, at this point last cycle, the ROI from the peak was at 0.03. Today we're at 0.09. So there is some element here of diminishing losses and as a function of time. But the last cycle also took around 802 days to find its true low. And we're currently at around day 651 or 652. So we could still have another 150 days of this nonsense before things ultimately shape up. Last cycle for ADA, I thought I was a genius for buying it in Q3 of 2018, and I was not. And then I thought I was a genius for buying some down here when it rallied back up here, and then it still just went down and put in a new low. And that's why this cycle I've been a lot more hesitant on the altcoin market, because I know how long the bleed can last for, right? Like, it can last for 2 years or so on both their USD pairs and their Bitcoin pairs. So I just wanted to provide an update. I mean, I haven't forgotten about ADA. It's just that you have to understand that when we're in the phase of the cycle where altcoins bleed back to Bitcoin, it's just harder to justify spending that much time talking about the altcoin market, because my general expectation is that they just bleed back to Bitcoin. And you can say what you want, but Cardano is a higher risk play than Bitcoin. I'm sure that even if you're an ADA maxi, you could appreciate that thought that Cardano is a higher risk play than Bitcoin. As far as ADA Bitcoin, I'd be looking towards around 400 Satoshis, which would basically be from the current levels another 60% drop or so. I know that might sound like a lot. I mean, it doesn't mean that ADA just goes down on its USD pair 60%. Doesn't mean they can't. But it's just, no matter what Bitcoin does, I would expect ADA to struggle to keep pace with it, probably for most of the rest of the year. I mean, even over here, even though it found its low in Q3, we still really tested those lows until the first quarter of the halving year. So you might see something, you might see something like this, right, where it bounces around here for a little bit, comes down here, and then tries to hold this range going into the halving year, and then maybe you'll find some renewed strength by the ADA Bitcoin valuation. The ADA Ether valuation, unfortunately, at this point, looks like it's bleeding. I mean, at one point I was more optimistic that it might be holding these range lows, but that doesn't really look to be the case, and you can see that so far it's just bleeding. I think the thing to look for is if it sort of hugs the lower part of this trend line, will it get a bounce back up, sort of like a mean reversion type thing, back into the general downtrend? Again, does it have to bleed forever? Not necessarily, but there are a lot of altcoins that do, and this is something that you should consider. Again, don't take it up with me. Take it up with the data. at this point, it has been bleeding, right? I mean, these lows are going lower as a function of time. Again, I don't control it. I just want you to know what it is. So this is something to look out for as well, because the ADA Ether valuation hasn't really been looking that great. I mean, this isn't really the greatest look at this point. So this is something that I think is worthwhile to keep an eye on as the months pass us by, right? So keep an eye on the ADA Ether valuation. The ADA Bitcoin valuation is a little bit more clear cut, at least in the short term. And finally, the ADA USD valuation is currently coming in around 26 cents. We know we just put in a new low. It could still go on for another, 5 months or something. So that's just something to think about. It's really hard calling bottoms. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to do it. I think what's more important is to look at the ADA Bitcoin valuation and to see if it holds its lows. It's maybe future lows. Let's say if it goes to 400 Satoshis, if it can hold those levels, then it might start to justify it. But right now, it's in my opinion, it's a little bit harder to justify it. Not to say that not to say that it can't bounce back up on its USD pair if Bitcoin goes back up. We know that it probably would. But the problem is that, again, if it's bleeding against Bitcoin, no matter if Bitcoin's going up or down, then the risk, your risk adjusted returns aren't as attractive as just holding Bitcoin during this phase of the market cycle.